Ma'am, we need your eyes on this, like right now. I hadn't even had my second cup of coffee yet, and already the junior legal associate was practically vibrating at my office door like a chihuahua on espresso. I didn't roll my eyes, but God, I wanted to. Instead, I just took the printout from his hand and gave it a once-over. Top corner, confidential memo. Center, preliminary asset divestiture timeline. Bottom line, someone had accidentally BCC'd the entire M and a partner list, and if even one of them forwarded this to the wrong inbox, we'd be dealing with a press leak before lunch. Tell Susan to recall the email. Scrub the servers, internal and external. Then get me the full recipient list and pull audit logs on who opened it. I want to know if any of those files pinged a non-company IP. I said it calmly, the way you tell someone how to make a decent grilled cheese, because that's what I did, cleaned up disasters before they made it to the top floor. 8 years ago, the CEO hired me to be his fixer. Senior strategist, technically. But mostly I played chess with a board full of jackals. I covered for their screw-ups, wrote the playbooks they never read, and made very, very bad problems go quietly away. This was a Tuesday. By 9:30 a.m., I'd already neutralized the leak, updated the kill switch protocol on external drives, and sent the internal comms team a revised routine testing email story to patch over the panic. Half the board hadn't even noticed. The CFO called me a miracle in heels, which is rich considering the man once tried to expense a safari trip as a leadership offsite. Anyway, crisis handled. I returned to my office, set down my coffee, and finally opened my calendar. It's when I noticed the first crack in the glass. My weekly one-on-one with the CEO, blocked out for the last 364 Mondays, was gone. Not rescheduled, just deleted. No cancellation email, no note, and the invite for Thursday's pipeline alignment meeting had been updated. I wasn't on it. The system didn't say declined, my name had been stripped out entirely, like I'd never existed. That's when I checked my system access log. The backend console. The doc libraries, the review queues I was the admin for were still there, but something was off. My edit privileges had been silently downgraded on 3 key folders. Someone had pulled access while I was scrubbing their mess. I didn't panic, not my style, but I did get still. Really still. Like when you hear a rattle in the woods and you don't know if it's a snake or a broken sprinkler head. I've been in the game long enough to smell a setup 2 weeks before it hits payroll. And I don't mean one of those dramatic stunts with HR marching someone out under fluorescent lights, while Janet from accounts films it for TikTok. I mean the real kind, the soft betrayal, the whispered restructuring, the kind of visionary pivot that starts with the CEO's son-in-law getting a corner office and ends with you finding your badge deactivated on a Monday morning. Anyway, if you're still listening at this point, I'll just say this: most people hear stories like this and assume they'd see it coming. They don't, you don't. Hell, I almost didn't. And I wrote the contingency clauses myself, so if you're into stories where the quiet one gets the last word and the last share, go ahead and like this and hit that subscribe button. It helps the team keep sharing these stories, and I promise this one's worth the ride. Because back then, I still thought I was just fixing their messes. I didn't realize I was the mess they were quietly planning to fix. I left the office early that day. Unusual for me. No one commented. But a few people looked up when I walked past, those slow, polite blinks like they're waiting for someone else to say something first. My phone buzzed as I stepped into the elevator. It was a calendar removal alert, one of my recurring system monitors pinging that a permissions token had been revoked. The source? Internal systems. Admin level. That's when I knew they were cleaning house. And I was the one with the mop until I wasn't. Still, I didn't react. I drove home, fed my cat, poured a glass of wine, and opened the encrypted archive I hadn't touched since the merger 6 years ago. The one with the original buyout documents, the contingency plans, and the dusty old LLC agreements we'd shelved and forgotten. I opened a file folder titled Trigger Events. Clause 14.6. He stared back at me like a snake blinking in the dark. And I smiled. Brandon was waiting in the HR glass box like he owned the oxygen inside it. Buttoned up just tight enough to hide the boy still flinching underneath, he gave me that oily, rehearsed smile I'd seen in every VC pitch deck photo of him, the kind of smile that says, I watched one video on leadership and now I think I'm Churchill. HR's director, Sandra, perched across from him, already sweating through her peach-colored blouse, fingers fidgeting with a copy of the employee handbook she'd clearly never read. I stepped in and closed the door gently behind me. Lisa, thank you for joining us, Brandon started, voice artificially smooth like someone had coached him through this. We'll make this brief. I didn't sit. I just looked at him like I was inspecting drywall for mold. He continued anyway. After a strategic review of our operational structure, we've decided your position has been dissolved, effective immediately. Sandra chimed in, rehearsed too, retroactively actually. The paperwork was finalized yesterday. You'll find the details in this packet. You're terminating me, I said, not a question. Just oxygen turned into words. Yes, Brandon said, a little too fast, as part of a broader alignment. It's not personal. Of course not, I replied. Flat as a parking lot. Sandra slid a manila envelope across the table. Your severance is outlined here. We've deactivated your badge and laptop access for security reasons. IT is packaging up your desk now, and we'd like to walk you out discreetly in the next 15 minutes. Like I was a ghost, and they were doing me the favor of letting me haunt the lobby one last time. Brandon cleared his throat, clearly expecting me to protest. You understand this may come as a surprise, but I'll sign, I said, pulling a pen from my blazer pocket. Sandra blinked. Oh, we have pens, I'll use mine. I sat, uncapped the fountain pen slowly, blue ink, pressure sensitive, and signed the acknowledgement page. Not the NDA, not the non-compete. Just the page that said I'd been told. It was the pen that mattered. You see, Brandon didn't know this. 3 years ago, I'd worked with legal to embed a signature verification framework tied to high-level exits. For security reasons. Fraud mostly, to prevent impersonations during hostile buyouts. The ink and pressure profile of that pen was tied to the archive, time-stamped, immutable, just a little gift to future me. I recapped the pen, slid it back in my pocket, and stood. Brandon looked surprised, disappointed even, like he thought I'd make a scene. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to blink. That would have made it personal. I picked up the envelope and walked toward the door. Sandra half rose, probably unsure if she was supposed to escort me. I spared her the dignity. Thanks, I said, voice dry as copy paper. Tell security not to bother. I know the way out. As I passed the reception desk, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Calm, poised. One hair out of place on the right, I fixed it. Outside, the sun hit hard, unforgiving and hot, the kind of heat that makes concrete radiate and men in ties sweat guilt. I didn't break stride. I got in my car, shut the door, turned the AC to Arctic and stared at the envelope in my lap. Strategic realignment, the paper inside still warm from the printer. They didn't even give me the courtesy of delay. They'd planned this for weeks, maybe longer. Brandon had probably spent the last few nights practicing that speech in the mirror, imagining how cool he'd look firing the legacy hire. The fixer, the woman who knew where the bodies were buried because she dug the damn holes. I opened my phone. Calendar access, gone. Email, locked. Internal Slack, deactivated. But my private archive, still live, still mine. I typed one word into the search bar, trigger. Up came exactly what I'd hoped. A memo titled Redemption, trigger DNC 14, dated 6 years ago, countersigned by the CEO himself, and attached to a dormant severance clause, clause 14.6. C. The moment I saw the activation criteria, my heart didn't race. It slowed. Involuntary termination of employee linked to executive familial restructuring shall trigger full buyout rights under LLC Agreement 6A, provided termination is initiated retroactively and verified by timestamp signature. And there it was, my calm, my stillness, not weakness, not denial, preparation, because the only person who could have built that clause was me, and they'd just walked directly into it. The storage unit smelled like forgotten ambition, cardboard, old ink, and the lingering disappointment of projects that never launched. I hadn't been back in years. Not since the second merger, when they moved legal offsite and digitized everything except what they didn't want indexed. My unit was sandwiched between a bankrupt catering company and someone's failed Etsy warehouse. Unit 209, 10 by 10 of corporate ghosts. I keyed in the passcode, my first boss's birthday, and the door groaned open like it knew something had changed. Against the back wall sat the filing cabinet I'd lugged in myself, behind a broken ergonomic chair and a crate labeled Q3 Crisis Playbooks. I moved the chair, crouched, and popped the bottom drawer. Inside, behind a weather-warped binder and 2 spare burner phones, was what I needed, a dusty metal lockbox. Combination only. I spun the dial, left 22, right 14, left 6. It clicked. Inside were files I'd compiled under a single hand-labeled folder, trigger events. Not in case of emergency. Not if something goes wrong. No, these were the break glass if they screw you papers. Not for panic, for precision. I flipped through them slowly. Clause 9, contractual immunity during executive misconduct cleanups, already expired. Clause 12, reinstatement rights if fired during acquisition. Only valid if I still held shares. I didn't. Then Clause 14.6, C, I paused. The paper was heavier than the others, original copy. Initialed, signed, stamped. Dated 6 years ago during the peak paranoia phase, when the CEO was convinced the board would stage a coup, and Brandon was still introducing himself as serially adjacent to success. It read, in the event of a retroactive involuntary termination initiated by an executive with familial ties to active leadership, the named employee shall assume full rights to equity redistribution per subsection 6A, provided the event meets authentication protocol outlined in Addendum B. I flipped to Addendum B. Authentication required 3 things. Termination must be retroactive. The trigger must be a leadership change involving family. The clause must be manually activated by a timestamped, notarized copy of the original agreement. I sat on the floor, file in my lap, hands steady. They'd handed me all 3 requirements on a silver platter. Retroactive, check. Brandon had said the paperwork was signed yesterday, even though they informed me today. Familial leadership, Brandon again. CEO's son-in-law, promoted 2 months ago. Manual activation, that's why I'd brought my pen to HR. I pulled out my phone and made one call. Hello, Mr. Alston? Yes, this is Lisa Redding. I need a notary. No, not a digital one. I need physical signature verification. Yes, original document. I need the timestamp logged by end of day. I'll pay double your rush fee. He asked where to meet. I said my kitchen table. I hung up. Then I took a breath, leaned back against the cold wall of the unit, and let the silence wrap around me like armor. This wasn't about revenge, or ego, or even the job. That bridge was already burnt and scattered to ash. This was about what I built. Because here's the thing, you don't spend 8 years fixing everything broken in a company, cleaning up the messes of men who think NDAs are magic shields, without learning how to protect yourself too. You don't sign agreements without building in doors they'll never notice because they never read the fine print. They just assume you'll stay quiet. They forget who wrote the clauses. I packed the folder into a fireproof bag, locked the box again, and shoved the drawer shut. Back in my car, I cracked the windows and let the air move. My dashboard read 3:42 p.m. I still had time. The next board meeting was scheduled for Friday. If they stuck to habit, Brandon would grandstand. The CEO would bluff and smirk. Legal would stay quiet, waiting for the mess to drip down the walls before they got involved. They'd think the fallout was still weeks away. But the moment this document hit their inbox with a verified timestamp and compliance signature, it was over. The equity wasn't in my name. Not yet, but that clause gave me full controlling interest in the trust that owned the equity pool, contingent on one thing, being fired by Brandon. I didn't need a raise. I didn't need applause. I needed them to underestimate me. Which, lucky for me, they had, repeatedly. By the time I turned onto my street, the notary had already texted his Ida. I poured a glass of water, set the document on the table, and straightened the corners. Then I waited. Sometimes, the most powerful move isn't a punch. It's a pen. My lawyer, Mitch Caldwell, operated out of a brick office behind a dry cleaner and a vape shop, with a receptionist who never once looked up from her Sudoku. He was the kind of attorney who wore loafers without socks, not because he was stylish, but because he liked to remind you he hadn't run out of middle fingers since the 90s. I liked him because he never asked why, just how soon. Need you to verify one signature, I told him, sliding the file across his desk. I didn't sit. Dated March 12, 6 years ago. Original ink. Initialed per section 14, witnessed per addendum B. He flipped through the pages, raised one brow. This what I think it is? Nope, I lied smoothly. Just confirming a dormant agreement for audit prep. He nodded once and opened the drawer with the heavy-duty stamp kit. You want timestamp logging? Yes. Multiple redundancies. One digital, two physical. I'll scan and handle encryption later. Anything else? I was never here. He smirked. You always say that. And yet here you are not in prison, I replied. He gave the file 2 stamps, scribbled a note in his ledger, then slid it back without another word. I took it, thanked him, and left through the side door into the alley behind the vape shop. By the time I got home, the documents were still warm from the scanner bed. I lined them up on my desk. The notarized signature page, the full 14.6. See clause, and a 6-year-old internal memo that had been buried under risk planning so long ago, even IT forgot it existed. Title, Redemption Trigger DNC 14. I read it again, slower this time, letting each word settle like the weight of a loaded chamber. The memo explicitly named the LLC agreement tied to our equity trust. It outlined emergency activation conditions. It referenced the buyout mechanism. Most importantly, it bore the CEO's digital signature. Verified, archived, time-locked. They'd all signed off on it during the merger hysteria, when everyone was more worried about IPO headlines than the fine print in contingency clauses. I compressed everything into an encrypted bundle. Used a salted hash key I'd created years ago. Scheduled the delivery through an old enterprise-grade auto-trigger tool I'd once configured for crisis communications. One of my many invisible systems. Timestamp, Friday, 1:00 p.m., mid-board meeting. I even routed the email through our internal legal queue so it'd show up on the main screen when they shared updates. No one would miss it. No one would be able to stop it, either. With that done, I shut my laptop and poured a second cup of coffee. The next morning, I got the first alert. Brandon, brilliant tactician that he was, had sent out an internal announcement. Subject line, Operational Vision Refresh, Q3 and beyond. I wasn't CC'd. The email talked about restructuring, flattening verticals, cross-collaboration, all the usual bingo card garbage. But there, 3 paragraphs down, was the part that made me blink twice, effective immediately. All legacy strategy roles will be reviewed for alignment against updated KPIs. Transition plans will begin next week. Legacy strategy roles, that was me, would have been me. Instead, I was now something else entirely. Something Brandon hadn't planned for, something the CEO hadn't even realized was walking back toward them. I watched the email rack up comments, reactions, nervous DMs, and I stayed silent. I didn't text anyone, didn't log into Slack, even open my old email archive. I wanted no trace of forward motion. No signals, just dead air, because the quiet ones, we don't argue in all hands, we don't fume in LinkedIn posts. We build devices, we hide switches, and when the time is right, we pull them. Midday, I drove to the bank to update my trust details, not the one they knew about, the other one, the one tied to the LLC referenced in Clause 14.6. C. I faxed over the notarized documents. Received confirmation in 37 minutes. By the time the sun dipped, everything was ready. Trigger clause armed, routing logic verified, legal metadata flawless. They had no idea that the last person they'd fired wasn't a redundant strategist. She was the only one with the ignition codes. I parked exactly where I always did, level 3, far back left, next to the concrete pillar that smelled like mildew and indifference. Same cracked windshield. Same hanging air freshener shaped like a tree, now a faded gray. Everything looked the same, except I wasn't. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking like war drums against the parking deck. Power walk, not fast, not slow, just confident, calculated. My blouse was starched, blazer pressed, hair twisted into the kind of bun that said don't bother. In my bag, nothing but the bare essentials. No laptop, no notebook, no badge backup. Just a pen, my phone, and a silent payload ticking down behind a firewall they never thought to check. I took the elevator to the lobby. A young guy in a too-tight suit looked up from the security desk. His face twitched when he saw me, something between confusion and fear. "Miss Redding," he said, half rising. "We thought, I'm here for the board meeting," I said, not slowing. "Room 17B, as always." He glanced at his monitor, then back at me. His hand hovered near his walkie. I stopped, locked eyes with him, and raised my badge. Beep. The gate clicked open. He didn't say another word. I walked past reception, through the hall, past the corporate art they installed to make the building feel inspired. It was still sterile, still overlit, still pulsing with people who measured worth by Slack emojis and calendar invites. I knew half of them saw me. I also knew none of them would stop me. I was a ghost now. Ghosts walk where they please. Room 17B had already filled. The board flanked the long glass table. Brandon stood near the projection screen, shuffling his notes like a kid prepping for show and tell. The CEO wasn't present yet, typical. Legal counsel was seated near the far end, whispering to his associate, expression locked in that default setting of preemptive regret. I opened the door like I owned the hinges and stepped inside. Brandon froze mid-sentence. He saw me, he blinked, and then he did something brilliant. He smiled. "Lisa," he chirped, voice an octave too high. "Oh, weren't expecting you today." I smiled back. "That's funny. I'm still on the board invite list. Room 17B, 1 o'clock p.m. You remember." His eyes twitched just a little. But his mouth kept up the act, of course, of course. We must have missed something in the calendar update. I walked past him, every step deliberate. Heels echoed louder than I expected. Maybe it was the marble. Maybe it was their collective silence. I slid into my usual chair, second seat from the left across from the CFO. No one said a word. The silence was sharp. Legal's associate looked like he was about to whisper something but decided to let the silence do the talking. Brandon cleared his throat. "Well, we've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in." He tapped his laptop. The projector buzzed to life. Slide 1, Q3 reorg strategy draft outline. I didn't look at the screen, I looked at my watch. 12:58 p.m. Brandon rambled about flattening structures and operational synergies, the usual verbal beige paint. He skipped past anything that sounded too technical, probably afraid someone would ask him to define the acronyms. 12:59 p.m. My watch vibrated, not loud, not dramatic, just a small pulse on my wrist. A timer I'd set in my phone earlier. 1 minute until the scheduled transmission. 1 minute until the quietest missile ever launched would land directly in this room. The legal associate shifted again, whispered something to counsel. Counsel leaned forward, squinting at something on his tablet. Another pulse on my wrist. I kept my face neutral, legs crossed, hands folded, no expression, no gloating, just waiting. Brandon was on slide 6 now, something about streamlined reporting. He didn't notice the subtle flicker in the room, legal's posture stiffening, two board members exchanging sideways glances. They could feel it, not consciously, but something had changed, like that moment before a storm hits when the pressure drops and everything gets too quiet. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Let them squirm, because the email was already in motion, routing through the internal legal queue. Labeled urgent, DNC 14 activation packet. Time-stamped, verified, immutable, exactly as I planned. Let Brandon keep talking. He had 45 seconds of oxygen left before the room caught fire. Legal's tablet dinged with the subtle chime only corporate software can make, bland, clinical, and terminally polite, like death by elevator music. Counsel didn't react at first, just glanced down as Brandon droned on about some fake efficiency pod structure no one in the room believed for a second. Then he froze. The associate next to him leaned in, read the preview line, and straightened like he'd just sat on a cattle prod. I didn't move. The email subject line glowed softly from across the table. Urgent DNC 14 activation packet, sealed legal trigger. It had landed. On schedule, unstoppable. "Excuse me," counsel said, cutting Brandon off mid-sentence for the first time in any meeting I'd ever seen. Brandon blinked. Sure, something wrong?" Counsel didn't answer him. He opened the email and tapped the attachment. On the conference screen behind Brandon, the sealed PDF opened automatically, full screen. Header, Equity Redistribution Protocol Clause 14.6. See subheader, activated. Involuntary termination event, verified. The room went so quiet you could hear the HVAC system struggling to keep up with the rising tension. I watched the CEO slide forward in his seat like he could physically lean his way out of what was coming. The first page of the packet showed my name, full legal, and company ID. Below it, the clause text. Every line perfectly formatted. Every margin precisely rendered. Then came the trigger line. In the event that Lisa Redding is involuntarily terminated under circumstances involving executive familial restructuring, this clause shall be considered activated as of termination timestamp. Authority to redistribute equity, transfer trust assets, and assume controlling interest shall proceed per subsection 6A, non-reversible upon verified execution. Then the signature page, dated 6 years ago, my signature, in blue ink, right where I left it, initialed by the CEO, verified by external counsel, witnessed by notary, all with timestamp metadata embedded and visibly certified. No edits, no loopholes, no delays, just the hammer dropping. Brandon stammered that can't be right. What is this? This isn't. Counsel didn't answer. He was scanning page 2, then page 3. Then he muttered, almost involuntarily, it's real. The CEO leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Turn that off right now. Counsel didn't move. The associate whispered, it's in the system queue, legal locked, can't stop it now. Another page loaded. The scanned memo, redemption trigger DNC 14. It referenced the clause, the conditions, the attached LLC agreement they forgot they'd ever signed. The CEO's digital signature sat on the bottom right corner of that memo like a landmine finally going off. Jesus Christ, the CFO breathed, slumping in his seat. Brandon looked at me like I'd grown horns. Pale, sweaty, like he finally understood what had just happened. You set this up? He managed. I tilted my head slightly. I didn't set anything up, you activated it, I just prepared it. Why would you? You fired me, Brandon, I said calmly, keeping my voice even, retroactively, as part of a familial leadership restructure. I didn't write the clause after you did that. You just walked right into it. His lips parted. But no sound came out. Across the room, legal counsel closed his tablet slowly, like he was afraid any sudden movement might trigger another document to appear. The CEO slammed a hand on the table. We never approved this. Counsel didn't even look up, sir, you signed it. March 12, 6 years ago. I can pull the version history right now. But this clause, this was never meant to be. Then maybe you should have read the documents you approved, I said, still calmly, almost gently. The CEO stared at me like he wanted to say something else, but words failed him. His face twitched. A small, involuntary tick under his left eye. The kind of thing that happens when someone realizes their whole kingdom was built on someone else's blueprint. Because now the room knew this wasn't a prank. It wasn't a stunt. It was legal, executed, irrevocable. Brandon sank into his chair like the gravity in the room had doubled. Nobody spoke. I didn't need to. The clause had done the talking for me. Read it again, the CEO barked, sweat beading on his brow. His tie was yanked halfway loose, eyes locked on legal like he could stare the clause into reversing itself. General counsel cleared his throat, pulled the printed copy from the packet displayed on the screen, and began, voice dry as toast and twice as bitter. Clause 14.6. See, in the event that Lisa Redding is subject to an involuntary termination, retroactive or otherwise, initiated by an individual with familial ties to the executive leadership team, and that said termination is associated with any operational restructuring or reorganization which affects previously assigned strategic duties. This clause shall activate automatically and irrevocably. Upon activation, controlling interest in the designated LLC equity trust, reference 6A, shall transfer to the named employee, in accordance with Addendum B, which confirms binding notarization and time-stamped execution at the time of the agreement. The room went still again. It was that word, irrevocably. You could feel it hit the table like a gun with no safety. Brandon's chair let out a squeak as he shifted, neck blotchy, lip twitching. This is absurd. This clause wasn't meant to be live. We all signed 100 of these things during the merger blitz. None of them were real. Just filler. Counsel didn't even look up. It's not filler. The notarization is on file. External, state-registered, certified. There's a copy in the Delaware archives. Digital and physical, and the memo, the CEO spat. This so-called DNC whatever? Counsel nodded grimly. DNC 14. Redemption trigger. It's also signed by you. Twice. I never read that damn memo. A beat passed. Then counsel said in the softest, most legal way possible, that does not invalidate it, sir. From the far side of the room, the board chair, a woman who had said nothing until now, slowly leaned forward and murmured, Brandon, that email you sent about the Q3 realignment. He blinked, confused. What about it? The wording. You included strategic role reviews, correct? Yeah, but you referenced alignment against updated KPIs, transition planning, and if I recall, legacy roles no longer matching the operational vision. That was the phrase? He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. Yes, he said finally. Why? Her tone was gentle, surgical, because it's Exhibit A now. Brandon looked like he'd been hit in the sternum. General counsel continued, flipping to the printed email stapled to the back of the clause packet. Brandon's message directly references restructuring. It's timestamped before Miss Redding was notified of her retroactive termination. The clause activates based on that trigger, which means, the associate chimed in, nervous but precise, you fired her, in a way that fulfilled every single activation condition she herself drafted 6 years ago. The CEO looked like he might actually stand up and rip the projector off the wall. Instead, he said, has to be a way to walk this back. Freeze the equity. File a challenge. Something. General counsel had already flipped to the final page. There's a provision here. Any attempt to challenge activation shall result in automatic transfer of administrative control to the named party. Pending final arbitration, however, arbitration may only be initiated before termination occurs. A pause. You missed the window. I remained silent. My presence was louder than any rebuttal. Brandon opened his mouth again, closed it, reached for his water glass, missed the coaster, and fumbled slightly. The ice clinked. The CEO finally sat down hard, hands clasped like prayer, elbows pressed to the polished wood as if trying to summon divine reversal through sheer boardroom posture. Nobody spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The room was unraveling not because I raised my voice or stormed in with threats, but because the paper trail had finally caught up. Every clause, every signature, every single oversight that came from assuming I was just a legacy asset quietly fading into obsolescence. The clause didn't just exist. It won, and now all they could do was scramble through pages trying to find an escape hatch I'd welded shut 6 years ago. At 1:07 p.m., while legal was still rifling through printouts like they were looking for a reset button that didn't exist, the CFO's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again, then his tablet lit up, vibrating softly across the boardroom table. Then his laptop. Then the board chair's phone. Then Brandon's. One after another, a cascade of quiet little alarms, barely noticeable beneath the tension in the air, but growing, spreading like digital wildfire. The CFO finally picked up his tablet and stared at the alert. The blood drained from his face. What? The CEO barked, voice raw, still lodged somewhere between fury and disbelief. The CFO didn't answer right away. He tapped, scrolled, then exhaled through his nose like a man watching his own funeral slideshow. It's a routing update, he muttered. Counsel leaned forward. From where? Equity admin portal. Finance. It's the executive pool just reindexed ownership control. System flagged a clause execution protocol. Routed the override through the LLC holding account. He turned the screen so they could see. My name, not as a beneficiary, as the administrator. Ownership 72% of executive equity holdings consolidated via clause 14.6. See per LLC 6A. Timestamp 10007 p.m. The board chair whispered, that's a majority. No, I said finally, voice calm as ever. That's control. Brandon coughed. That's not possible. The clause didn't say anything about. Counsel cut him off. It did. You just didn't read that far. Addendum C specifies that upon execution, all equity tied to executive performance packages, vesting or otherwise, consolidates under trust control, and that the named administrator assumes governance. The CEO slammed his fist against the table. This was not the deal. She was supposed to take the cash severance and go quietly. Counsel turned to him, and for the first time in the entire meeting, he raised his voice. Don't touch her. Don't raise your voice. Don't even stand near her. Excuse me? She's not staff anymore. She's not subject to your chain of command. She's not under HR. She's not an employee. She's a stakeholder. No, an owner, counsel corrected, with authority, with signatures, with filing rights. Brandon was blinking too fast now. There's got to be something, some opt-out, some clause to there isn't, the CFO muttered. It's been 6 years. The clause wasn't challenged, wasn't sunset, and now it's live. Fully enforced. System already processed equity transfer and notified the SEC. It's done. The CEO's mouth hung open. His face, that usual cocktail of ego and overconfidence, was stripped bare. Behind his eyes, I saw the dawning realization. This wasn't a PR nightmare. This wasn't an HR mistake. This wasn't a reputational hit he could gaslight into irrelevance. This was structural, foundational, permanent. He leaned back in his chair like the table itself might bite him. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly the leather creaked. The board chair looked at me for the first time. Lisa, she said, measured. Do you intend to take an active role? I tilted my head. What do you mean? Do you want to vote? I smiled faintly. Not yet. Silence. The weight of the moment wasn't just in the equity transfer or the clause execution. It was in the shift of who mattered. The woman they hadn't CC'd. The one whose desk they boxed up without a second thought. The one who used to sit silently in strategy meetings while Brandon tossed around buzzwords like hypergrowth and synergy ecosystems. Now I was the only one in the room whose name the servers still obeyed. The lawyer adjusted his tie. We'll need to update the capitalization table. The CFO nodded grimly. Already done. System pinged it automatically. Someone at the far end of the table stood and quietly excused himself, probably off to call their personal lawyer. Brandon opened his mouth again, but there was nothing left to say. He looked at me like I'd broken the laws of physics. I hadn't. I'd simply enforced the ones they never bothered to read. From ghosted to untouchable. from background noise to controlling voice. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice once. The CEO didn't breathe so much as seethe. His chair scraped backward with a violent squeal as he stood, no lunged across the table toward the clause printout like he could physically rip the ink off the page and make the last 10 minutes unhappen. His fingers trembled as he grabbed it. This is fake, he hissed, spit forming in the corners of his mouth. This signature, this isn't real. There's no way we signed this. No way she get forensics, he barked, turning to legal. Get them now? Get the signature specialists. The file authenticity team. I want a full audit. Full breakdown, digital forensics, I want timestamps. Logs, if this is doctored, I swear to God, he didn't finish. Because counsel, who had gone quiet again, just sat there. Calm, tired even. Then, after a long breath, he said in a voice so even it almost sounded like sympathy, we already did. The CEO blinked. Counsel continued. 3 years ago, during the archive audit after the liquidity panic, every dormant clause tied to equity or executive power was verified and catalogued, including this one. He picked up a folder from his bag, opened it. Here's the timestamp verification from Kessler and Blaine. Notary ID 1785C, state certified, signature authenticated, pressure curve, ink density. Dated March 12, exactly as filed. Witnessed, logged, and stored by you, sir, on company record. He placed the folder on the table like a headstone. The CEO's hand hovered in the air, trembling, then slowly dropped. The room was dead quiet except for the soft, electronic hum of the screen behind Brandon. One by one, the tabs began to update. Equity routing confirmation complete. Ownership control index updated. Clause execution flag green. Notifications sent to legal finance sec. Final status irreversible. It was done. Not tomorrow. Not pending review. Not subject to appeal. Executed. I stood up. The chair didn't scrape, didn't squeak. Just eased backward like it was letting go. I reached into my bag and pulled out my old company badge. That little laminated square I used to wear every day like armor until it became a target. The one that buzzed me into meetings I was no longer invited to, halls where my name was slowly disappearing. I placed it on the table, dead center, turned it so the name faced Brandon. He looked up at me, lips parted, face pale, eyes wide. He didn't speak, he didn't move. Thanks for firing me, I said, voice quiet, crisp. I couldn't activate it myself. The lawyer closed his folder. The CFO exhaled, long and low, and on the wall behind them the boardroom screen flickered once, then locked into a single line of text, white on black, ownership transfer complete. No music, no dramatic gavel. Just silence. I turned, walked to the door, and left without another word. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.